Hello, 8th grade American history students. This is Mr. Bowman bringing to you the Spirit of Independence Vocabulary, Unit 2. Let's get started. Learning vocabulary. We want to take a few short seconds to talk about some good ways of looking at vocabulary, taking down the definitions of words and helping us use those vocabularies in our area of study in that unit, in our dialect, in our writing, and making it easier for us to bring it into our memory. Write an explanation of a vocabulary term in your own words. Great idea. Drawing a symbol or picture or cartoon of what the word represents. Awesome idea, especially if you're a visual learner. Come up with a gesture to represent the word. Great idea. If you can remember what the gesture is. It's supposed to be funny. Or give an example for the word. An example would be, and put it in context. So let's get going. First term, balance of trade. What does that mean? It references the difference between a country's imports, items that a country brings in, and exports, things that a country ships out. When a country imports more than it exports, it has an unfavorable balance of trade. What that means is we end up spending a lot more than we're making because we have to pay for the things brought into our country when we get paid for the things that we export. Balance of trade. Mercantilism was the economic plan or policy during the colonial period. It's the economic policy that capitalism will follow, but it dealt primarily with making sure that you have more exports than imports, making more money than you are spending. Mercantilism is again that word given to that economic plan, that economic theory. During the 15 and 1600s, it was felt that the colonies existed for the benefit of England, and what the colonies were providing England in the mercantile system was really a lot of raw materials. When we talk about mercantilism, this is a great entrance for something that you're already familiar with, and that's a triangular trade. Triangular trade is something that we've all heard of, and we've probably drawn it at one time or another, or reenacted in some type of class play about the triangular trade. But the triangular trade is all based on the premise of mercantilism. Things are going from one place to another, and every place that things either go from or to, they have a value. And the whole point is, whatever triangle there is to make sure that you have items on the ship that are of value to someone. So look at North America, the British colonies. We're sending out a lot of raw materials, and what are we getting back? A lot of manufactured goods and some other items used in producing things. Triangular trade. War debt. Anytime we talk about debt, I think most of us are familiar with it, is when you owe money. After a country fights a war, a lot of times it owes money from fighting the war. Money a country owes as a result of being in a war. And unfortunately, we get involved in a number of conflicts, and wars are very expensive. In this particular situation, when we're talking about war debt in the colonial period, we're really talking about the money that is spent and owed from the French and Indian War. Talk about that more later. There's your example. We fight the French and their Indian allies for control of the Ohio Valley area in North America. Rebellion. When people go against authority and fight against their government. Armed resistance to the government. And you know what? We see a lot of examples around the world right now, presently, of rebellion. what we are going to study is you are going to see a growing resistance against England by people living in the colonies. Okay? Colonies rebel against Britain. We will eventually have armed conflict at a place called Lexington, and that was referred to always as the shot heard around the world. Hey, Schoolhouse Rock! Militia, an army that is made up of ordinary citizens rather than professional soldiers, or not the regular army. Most of the British soldiers, if not all of them, were professional soldiers. On the other hand, in the colonies, most of the people were average citizens like you and I that were called to duty to defend primarily the region in which they lived in. Protest. Hey, protesting something to speak strongly against something you don't like, a formal statement that you disagree. I'll tell you what, a couple weeks ago when Wisconsin got beat in their football game, they filed a protest strongly against something. What was that something? It was a bad call at the end of the game. Protest. In our historical context, the colonists protested a lot of British laws. They did it by boycotting in the Boston Tea Party. They dumped tea over the sides of ship. They tarred and feathered tax collectors, intimidation. They wrote letters. They organized themselves within colonial regions to protest what the British government was doing. Boycott. A bunch of people refused to buy something as a way of protesting. To join together to refuse to deal with or buy something as a way of punishment. Boycott. One of the more famous boycotts in 20th century, obviously, is like the Montgomery bus boycott, which we just celebrated the Civil Rights Movement anniversary of March on Washington. But that kind of going back to boycott, Montgomery bus boycott. In this colonial example, we have a lot of colonists refusing to buy British goods after British Parliament passes certain tax acts, and the colonists refuse to use it or buy those items. Revenue, the money collected by a government. How does a government operate? Well, a government has to have money to operate. Where does that money come from? It comes from taxes. We pay taxes. Duties, which is another word for taxes. Customs and other sources. An example in our historical unit, Britain needed to raise more money or revenue, so they taxed the colonists. So the colonists would have to pay taxes, so Parliament, the British government, would have more money to operate. Taxation, making people pay money to the government to help pay for government services. The act of laying a tax or of imposing taxes, as on the subjects of state by government, the raising of revenue, also a system of raising revenue. Woo! A lot of stuff. Taxation, really making people pay money to the government to help pay for government services. What do I pay for? Taxes. Well, I pay for schools. I pay for having good roads. I pay for having adequate fire services and police services and in other health services. Very important. Government needs money to operate. That money, a lot of that money comes from its citizens. Parliament passed a law back in this time period, Stamp Act, that placed taxes on paper goods. So if you were going to use anything, legal documents or anything dealing with paper, you would pay a small tax. Tyrant, an overly strict and mean leader. My sons would probably call me a tyrant sometimes, but I'm really not. I'm a big teddy bear. A ruler who exercises power in a harsh, cruel manner. We've had modern day people around the world that have been characterized as tyrants. The leader of Iran, the leader of North Korea, or Saddam Hussein, or these people that have committed crimes against their own people. In this particular case, The colonists were always referring to King George III, calling him a tyrant. Anybody who does not agree with me is a traitor and a scoundrel. Well, the colonists looked at King George III as a tyrant because they really felt that he was abusing his power. Revolution. Hey, spinning around in a circle, that's a revolution, but not this kind of revolution. A forcible overthrow of a government. So when we use it in a historical context, it talks about a way that a government is overthrown. Overthrow or thorough replacement of an established government or political system by people governed. Our example, of course, is the American colonists fight the American Revolution against Great Britain to gain their independence. And we eventually do. You all know that. Monarchy, ruled by a king or queen. Well, in colonial times, the British government had a monarchy, form of government. They had a king. And you know what? Back in the colonial period, there were a lot of examples around the world of monarchies and kings and queens. They're a lot less popular or a lot less now than they were back during that time period. Monopoly. No, not the game, but the philosophy is total control of a business or industry. A single company owns all or nearly all the market for a given type of product. Wouldn't it be awesome to have a monopoly on all the gas in the United States? Yeah, it would, but it's not healthy for the economy. Our examples in this particular situation deals with tea. The colonists were worried about a company called the British East India Company, who was owned by the British government, and they dealt with trading tea. And they felt that they would potentially have a monopoly on the tea trade in the colonies if they were allowed to sell the tea at the prices that the government wanted them to. So in response to that, of course, we have the Boston Tea Party, and they chuck all the tea overboard as a way of protest. Hey, that was another vocabulary term. Propaganda. Words or pictures used to sway a person's opinion. Propaganda. Information of a biased or misleading nature. It can be used to promote or publicize a particular political cause or point of view. Can be. Well, how was it used during our unit of study? Well, some examples. Some people call the Boston Massacre engraving propaganda. Thomas Paine's pamphlet, Common Sense, propaganda. You know, they look at the Boston Massacre, and yes, it's tragic. 5 people died. But the visual context of the engraving done by Paul Revere and in the colonial newspapers with a heading of massacre has a tremendous effect on the people. Killing large numbers of people for no reason and indiscriminate and brutal slaughter of many people. A lot of people will call what happened in Syria recently a massacre. We know of other massacres in the United States history dealing with Native Americans. Wounded Knee, Sand Creek, Battle of Little Bighorn, just to name some. Colonists claimed that the British soldiers massacred innocent colonists in Boston Square. Custom duties, usually a tax on imports. So when you buy things that are imported, at least some things that are imported, the reason why they cost more is there's an additional tax put on those. The Townshend Acts placed duties on colonial imports of lead, glass, paper, and tea. So if you wanted to buy those items, obviously you had to pay a little bit more. Parliament. Parliament was the law-making body in Great Britain or England. Our equivalent to Parliament, of course, is our legislative branch. Parliament passed many acts or laws that the colonists disagreed with. Independence. Free from control of others. Hey, we all want a little independence for ourselves, not governed by a foreign power, self-governing. Oh, how do we want to use it? We did not want to be under the control of another country, or the American colonies wanted their independence from the country of England or Great Britain. Liberty, being free from restriction or control. Another great word for liberty is freedom. Freedom from oppressive restrictions. Freedom from unwarranted authority. The colonists felt King George III and Parliament were restricting their rights as Englishmen. Alliances and allies, an agreement to help each other, formal agreement or treaty between two or more nations to cooperate for specific purposes. In this case, we got a lot of support from different Native American groups during the French and Indian War. During the American Revolution, we had help from the French. Repeal, to get rid of a law, to overthrow it, to throw it out, the act of annulling or getting rid of it. So some of these taxes or laws that Parliament placed on the colonists, Parliament passed a law, placed taxes on paper goods, and it was later repealed. That means it was eliminated. And that is Unit 2 vocabulary. Good luck.